Antonio Brown might have the most insane career arc in NFL history, because this is not just a story about a superstar who fell off. This is a story about a 6th-round pick who became the best wide receiver in football, built one of the most dominant 5-year peaks the league has ever seen, won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady, and then somehow became more famous for chaos than for the greatness that made him a legend in the first place. And that is what makes Antonio Brown so difficult to explain, because if you only watched the headlines, you might think he was just a distraction. But if you watched him play, you know there was a stretch where he was nearly impossible to guard, and the crazy part is, both things are true. Antonio Brown was one of the greatest wide receivers of his generation, and he also became one of the most unpredictable stories the NFL has ever seen. So the real question is not just what happened to Antonio Brown. The real question is, how did someone that dominant, that skilled, that unstoppable end up walking off an NFL field shirtless in the middle of a game and never playing again? To understand the chaos, you first have to understand the greatness, because Antonio Brown was not handed anything. He was born in Miami, the son of Eddie Brown, one of the greatest arena football players ever. So football was in his blood, but that did not mean his path was easy. Antonio's life early on was unstable. He moved around, dealt with school issues, struggled to stay on track, and by the time high school ended, he was not some clean 5-star recruit with every major college fighting for him. He had talent, but he did not have the structure around him, and that forced him onto a harder path, first through junior college, then eventually to Central Michigan. And that is where the first signs started showing up, because Brown was not the biggest receiver. He was not the most physically intimidating, but he was quick in a way that defenders could not handle. His feet were sudden, his roots were sharp, and once he got the ball in space, everything changed. He could stop, start, cut, and accelerate before defenders even knew what happened, and little by little, the production started to match the flashes. At Central Michigan, he became a problem, not just a productive college receiver, but the kind of player who looked like he was playing the game at a different speed. He could return kick, catch underneath routes, stretch defenses, and create yards after the catch. But even then, the NFL did not fully buy in, because scouts looked at him and saw an undersized receiver from a smaller program, not a future superstar. And when the 2010 NFL draft came around, that doubt became obvious. Round after round passed, receivers came off the board, teams took chances on players who would never come close to what Brown became, and Antonio Brown kept waiting until finally, in the 6th round, the Pittsburgh Steelers took him with the 195th pick. And at that moment, nobody thought Pittsburgh had just found one of the most dominant receivers of the decade. They thought they found a special teams player, maybe a depth receiver, maybe a return man, maybe someone who could fight for a roster spot if everything went right. But Antonio Brown had different plans. Early in Pittsburgh, he was not handed a starring role. He had to earn every snap. He started on special teams, returning kicks and punts, trying to make coaches notice him. And the Steelers were already a serious organization with established players, big personalities, and a winning culture, so there was no room for a late-round rookie to act like a star before he became one. But even in limited chances, Brown flashed. He had that quick twitch movement, that ability to turn nothing into something. And slowly, he forced his way onto the field. Then came the famous playoff moment against the Ravens in the 2010 season, when he caught a deep ball from Ben Roethlisberger on 3rd and long, pinning it against his helmet and changing the game. And that play mattered because it showed the Steelers something. This was not just a returner. This was a player who could deliver in the biggest moment. From there, the rise started getting serious, and by 2013, Antonio Brown was no longer just a nice piece in the offense. He was the offense. Over 100 catches, over 1,400 yards, week after week dominance. And what made Brown different was the precision. He was not just a deep threat, not just a speed guy. He could beat you in every possible way. Quick slants, option routes, deep comeback, fades, screens, double moves, toe taps on the sideline. And his connection with Ben Roethlisberger became one of the most dangerous quarterback-receiver duos in football, because Ben trusted him completely, sometimes throwing the ball before Brown even came out of his break, and Brown would always be exactly where he needed to be. Then came the stretch that turned him from star to legend. From 2014 through 2018, Antonio Brown was arguably the best wide receiver in football. Not one of the best, the best. He led the league in catches, led the league in yards, scored touchdowns, destroyed double teams, and did it with a level of consistency that almost nobody could match. And that is the part people sometimes forget because of everything that happened later. Antonio Brown was not a one-year wonder. He was not a highlight merchant. He was a machine. 100 catches felt normal. 1,500 yards felt normal. Big games felt normal. And that is insane, because those numbers are supposed to be career seasons for most receivers. But for Antonio Brown, they became the standard. In 2014, he went off for almost 1,700 yards. And by then it was clear defenses had no answer. If they pressed him, he beat them at the line. If they played off, he ate the cushion. If they doubled him, he found the soft spot anyway. And if Ben Roethlisberger extended the play, Brown became even more dangerous, because nobody was better at breaking off a route, finding space, and giving his quarterback a target. And that backyard football chemistry became almost impossible to defend. Then in 2015, he had one of the most ridiculous receiving seasons ever. Even with quarterback injuries affecting the Steelers, Brown still put up huge numbers, and his performance against the Raiders that year was one of those games that showed just how unstoppable he could be. 17 catches, 284 yards, and it felt like the Raiders could have put the entire entire defense on him, and he still would have found a way to get open. That was peak Antonio Brown. Not just fast, not just talented, but technically perfect. The footwork, the releases, the body control, the hands, the awareness. Every detail was elite, and he played with an edge, a confidence that made him feel larger than life. But the same confidence that made him special also started becoming part of the problem, because as Brown became a superstar, his personality grew with him. And at first, fans loved it. The dances, the celebrations, the flashy cleats, the blonde mustache, the social media posts, the whole energy around him was fun because he backed it up. But little moments started stacking up. Fines for celebrations, sideline outbursts, disagreements, tension, and Pittsburgh kept tolerating it because Antonio Brown was too good to replace. Then came one of the first viral cracks. After the Steelers beat the Chiefs in the playoffs, Brown went on Facebook Live from the locker room while head coach Mike Tomlin was giving a private speech. And suddenly, the whole world heard Tomlin talking about the Patriots before the AFC Championship. And that might sound small compared to what came later, but inside an NFL locker room, that was a big deal because it broke trust, and trust is everything in a football team. But again, Brown was still so good that Pittsburgh moved forward. Then there were the sideline moments, the visible frustration, the towel over his head, the arguments, the sense that if Brown was not getting the ball, tension could build fast. And in a normal player, that might get you benched, but Brown was not normal. He was the best receiver in football, and when someone is that productive, teams will convince themselves they can manage everything else. But by 2018, the relationship in Pittsburgh was cracking beyond repair. The Steelers were talented but unstable. The Killer Bees era of Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown had produced incredible offense, but not a Super Bowl. Bell was holding out, the locker room was tense, and Brown's relationship with Ben started to deteriorate publicly, with Brown later feeling disrespected and underappreciated. And then came the final week of the season, when Brown reportedly had issues at practice, was benched, and did not play in a must-win game against the Bengals. And once that happened, it became obvious the Steelers could not keep going like this. So one of the greatest receiver runs in franchise history ended not with a championship, not with a farewell, but with a trade demand and a breakup. When the Steelers traded Antonio Brown to the Oakland Raiders in 2019, it looked like the perfect reset for about 5 seconds. New team, new coach, new money, a chance to prove Pittsburgh wrong, and the Raiders even gave him a massive contract, but almost. Immediately, the entire thing turned into one of the strangest offseason sagas the NFL has ever seen. First came the cryotherapy incident. Brown entered a cryotherapy chamber without proper protection on his feet, and the result was severe frostbite that left the bottom of his feet looking damaged and painful. The images went viral, and suddenly, the Raiders' new superstar receiver could not practice because of a bizarre injury that sounded like something nobody had ever heard before. Before that story could even calm down, the helmet drama took over. Brown wanted to keep wearing his old helmet. The NFL had banned older models for safety reasons, and Brown fought it hard, filing grievances, missing practice, threatening to walk away if he could not wear the helmet he wanted. And what should have been a minor equipment issue became national news for weeks. Every sports show was asking the same question: is Antonio Brown really going to retire over a helmet? Then things got worse. The Raiders started fining him for missed time. Brown posted the fine letter online, and the situation escalated with general manager Mike Mayock with reports of a heated confrontation where Brown had to be held back. And by this point, the Raiders had not even played a regular season game yet, but their biggest off-season acquisition had already become the biggest story in football for all the wrong reasons. Then came the John Gruden phone call. Brown recorded a private conversation with his head coach and released it as part of a video. And even though Gruden tried to keep the relationship alive, it was clear everything was spiraling. Brown asked for his release, the Raiders let him go, and somehow Antonio Brown's Raiders career ended with 0 regular season catches, 0 games played, and one of the most chaotic offseason runs the league had ever seen. And then, in a twist that made the entire league stop, the New England Patriots signed him almost immediately, and that created a whole new conspiracy feeling around the story, because suddenly people wondered if Brown had forced his way out of Oakland to land with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. And whether that was true or not, it made the story even crazier, because after weeks of chaos, Brown was now on the defending champions with the greatest quarterback ever. For one game, it looked like football might win again. Brown caught passes from Brady, scored a touchdown against Miami, and reminded everyone that the talent had never gone anywhere. But off the field, serious allegations surfaced, including a civil lawsuit accusing him of sexual assault, and the Patriots, who usually avoid distractions, released him after just one game. And once again, Antonio Brown went from superstar weapon to unemployed in a matter of days. At that point, the football world did not know if he would ever play again, and the headlines kept coming. Legal issues, civil disputes, social media posts, public comments, arguments with former teammates, and moments that made fans wonder what was happening behind the scenes. And this is where the Antonio Brown story became bigger than football in a way that was uncomfortable, because it was no longer just about a difficult teammate. It was about a person whose life looked increasingly chaotic in public. There was the incident involving a moving truck driver in Florida, where Brown was accused of battery connected to a dispute over payment, and that led to legal consequences. There were lawsuits involving unpaid debts, allegations from former associates, and a constant stream of headlines that made it hard to imagine another team taking the risk, but Tom Brady did. In 2020, Brady was in Tampa Bay, building a new championship team with the Buccaneers, and he pushed for Brown to get another chance. And that mattered because Brady was not just any quarterback. He had credibility. He had already played with Brown briefly in New England, and he believed the talent was worth the risk, so Tampa signed him. And this time, the role was different. He did not have to be the entire offense. He was not the number one receiver. He was part of a loaded group with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, and Leonard Fournette, and that reduced role seemed to help. Brown could focus on specific matchups, short routes, red zone plays, and when the Buccaneers made their Super Bowl run, Brown contributed. Then in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, he caught a touchdown, and for a moment it looked like one of the strangest redemption stories in NFL history had actually worked. Antonio Brown was a champion again, this time not as the face of a team, but as a dangerous piece in a title run. But the piece did not last, because in 2021, controversy returned. Brown was suspended for using a fake vaccination card, another strange headline in a career full of them, and even then, Tampa kept him because when he was available, he could still play. But the tension was building again, and then came the moment that will probably define the end of his football career forever. January 2nd, 2022, Buccaneers versus Jets, MetLife Stadium. Tampa was losing, Brown was on the sideline, and something happened between him and the coaching staff. Later there would be arguments about whether he was injured, whether he refused to go in, whether he felt disrespected, but in the moment, none of that mattered because what fans saw was unbelievable. Antonio Brown took off his jersey, took off his shoulder pads, threw his gloves and undershirt into the crowd, stood on the field shirtless, waved to the fans, jogged through the end zone, and left the stadium while the game was still being played. It was one of the most surreal images in NFL history, not just because a player quit mid-game, but because it was Antonio Brown, one of the greatest receivers of his generation, walking away in the most dramatic way possible. And after that, the Buccaneers released him, and he never played another NFL snap. But even after the football career ended, the headlines did not stop. If anything, they became even more unpredictable. Brown leaned into music, social media, podcast appearances, and a media brand he called CTESPN, often posting jokes, memes, attacks, and comments that kept him trending. Sometimes funny, sometimes confusing, sometimes controversial, and people kept watching because with Antonio Brown, nobody knew what would happen next. He released music and promoted himself with phrases like "put that on," turning his post-NFL personality into a kind of internet spectacle. But behind the entertainment were serious issues too, including financial trouble. In 2024, Brown filed for bankruptcy and reportedly listed debts near $3 million, a shocking turn for someone who had earned tens of millions during his playing career. Then there was the Albany Empire situation, where Brown became involved with an arena football team connected to his father's legacy. But instead of becoming a feel-good football ownership story, it turned into more chaos, confusion over ownership, unpaid bills, players and coaches speaking out, and eventually the team getting kicked out of its league. Another strange chapter in a career that already felt impossible to summarize. And then came even more serious headlines. In 2025, Brown was charged in Florida with second-degree attempted murder with a firearm related to an alleged shooting incident after a celebrity boxing event. He has pleaded not guilty, and his side has claimed self-defense. But the case added another dark and serious chapter to a story that had already gone far beyond football. And that is where Antonio Brown's story becomes difficult to talk about, because on one hand, you have to recognize the player, the 6th-round pick who became a superstar, the receiver who dominated the league, the footwork, the roots, the production, the all-pro seasons, the Super Bowl touchdown, the numbers that put him among the best wide receivers ever. But on the other hand, you cannot ignore the chaos, the burned bridges, the legal problems, the bizarre exit, the social media spirals, the lawsuits, the team conflict, the helmet saga, the frozen feet, the Raiders meltdown, the Patriots release, the fake vaccination card suspension, the shirtless walk-off, the bankruptcy, the arena team disaster, and the recent criminal charge he's still dealing with. That is what makes Antonio Brown's career so insane, because usually a player is remembered mostly for what he did on the field. But with Brown, the off-field story became so loud that it almost swallowed one of the greatest peaks ever. And that is the tragedy of it, because if Antonio Brown's career had ended normally, if he had stayed with Pittsburgh, aged gracefully, played a few more productive seasons, and walked away quietly, we might be talking about him as a top 5 receiver ever without much argument. But instead, every conversation about his greatness comes with an asterisk. Not because he lacked talent, not because he lacked production, but because the chaos became impossible to separate from the player. So when you ask what Antonio Brown was, the answer depends on where you stop the story. If you stop it in 2018, he is a legendary underdog, a 6th-round pick who became the best receiver in football. If you stop it after the Super Bowl in Tampa, he is a flawed but redeemed superstar who found a way to win again. But if you keep going, if you include everything after, the story becomes something else entirely. A warning about fame, pressure, ego, instability, and how quickly a legendary career can turn into something unrecognizable. Antonio Brown was not just good, he was great, maybe historically great, and that is what makes the fall so shocking, because the higher someone rises, the louder the crash feels. And with Antonio Brown, the crash never really seemed to end.